Joining us now to talk about this is Sean Spicer. He's the Chief Strategist and Communications Director for the Republican National Committee. He's joining us from New Hampshire. Sean, it's great to see you. So, as John was saying, everyone from Mitt Romney, Newt Gingrich, even Ted Cruz, Ben Carson, they're all saying, let Carly on the stage. So what's one more?
Well, I think, she's a phenomenal candidate, but there's criteria that was issued. And unfortunately, I think it's not just it's not as easy as just saying that. And I think that's part of the problem, that there are candidates that have dropped out that did well in Iowa as well, that got delegates, that made a decision in part probably because that they didn't think they were going to make the stage. And now to sort of change the rules for 24 hours out, I think would be unfair to them as well. So the criteria was issued. I think, ABC made it available. Everyone knew what they had to do to get into this debate. It was extremely inclusive in terms of making sure that people who did well in Iowa, the top 6 people in New Hampshire, the top folks nationally, all had an opportunity to make it in.
I feel like this is the 3rd or 4th time we've gone through something like this with you, and every time we ask the question, I can see the frown on your face. So we'll move on. Enough with debates over who gets on the debate stage.
John doesn't want to make you unhappy, but I do.
Let's talk about Iowa, shall we? Because the Des Moines Register put in an editorial last night that said Ted Cruz's campaign of deceit should worry voters. And the Des Moines Register slams Cruz for what it calls the deceptive mailer sent out beforehand about, voting rates, and also talked about the voicemails from campaign staff saying Ben Carson may be dropping out of the race. Do you have a position here? Do you think the Cruz campaign went too far?
That's really not for me to decide. I mean, you've talked about how we've spoken on.
But isn't it, Sean? I mean, doesn't the Republican National Committee have to weigh in on how campaigns are run?
No, we don't. No, because look, there's things that each of these campaigns has to run their own race, and sometimes when you run a race, you go over the line, and the voters are the ones who make that decision that you've crossed the line, or a legal entity, a judge or whatever. It's not our job. You've heard me say it before on various issues, to get in the middle and call balls and strikes on this. That's up for the voters to decide and each state to decide. And important. I mean, I look at what happened on the other side, and you want to talk about egregious. 6 precincts in Iowa were decided by a coin toss in the Democratic Party. So a party that champions this whole idea of people's participation and rights and all this used a coin toss to decide 6 precincts. I think if you want to talk about egregious, that's pretty where.
Yeah, but you're calling balls and strikes on the Democrats, but not your own party. You're willing to criticize a party you have no control over, but you don't want to talk about something that is within the parameters of your office.
But what you're asking me is to talk about how a campaign message or use tactics pro or con against another candidate, or talked about themselves. That is just deciding how a campaign. That's campaign strategy. Each campaign decides for themselves how they're going to run that. That's vastly different than deciding the outcome. I mean, the Democrats literally chose who would get delegates by the flip of a coin. So I get your question, and you're asking me to decide whether or not a mail or an action or the way someone conveyed their campaign or somebody else's was fair. But sometimes in politics, it's not all pretty. I get that. That's vastly different than deciding the outcome of a precinct's election by a coin toss. The Des Moines Register that you brought up talked about just how poorly run, how undemocratic the other side was. And I think that's where frankly, the discussion should be, that the idea that that's how we're deciding our elections is pretty sad.
Let me ask you about this then. Hillary Clinton's emails. That has been a very big target, not only of Republican candidates, but of the RNC itself. The RNC has said that the whole controversy surrounding her emails disqualifies her for being president. Well, now we know that under a Republican administration, the Secretary of State, Colin Powell, his emails they also found classified emails in his personal email account. So, does this neutralize the issue, or maybe more importantly, does this disqualify Colin Powell from running or for being Secretary of State?
Well, he's Secretary of State, and I don't know that he's trying to serve as Secretary of State.
And
I won't. But I don't want to diminish this, but I think if Colin Powell were to run for President of the United States, I think that he would probably have to answer this question. So if Colin Powell chooses to seek the presidency, I think it would be a fair question to ask. My understanding is he's not. But second of all, there's a few distinctions. Number one, it's one thing to have a few isolated instances, which I think that they found in the Colin Powell situation, and he should have his opportunity to explain that, which is not what's going on in the Clinton thing. They took their thing on a private, unclassified server, said that they had scrubbed themselves, there was no classified information. That is not just false one time, but now hundreds of times. It's not just sensitive information. It's multiple instances of top secret information. And we still don't have access to all of the emails. It was the Clintons who actually scrubbed them first. We don't know what else that they never actually turned over.
So you do not think this neutralizes the issue and puts this issue away for Republicans at all? You're still going to continue to bring this up?
But I think there's absolutely, it's a fair thing. I mean, she's been asked. She took them, put them on a private server, which is unclassified. Never mind the cyber issues that we face in terms of a country in places like China and Russia that are constantly trying to seek information about how our government operates, something that Secretary Clinton herself wrote about in her book. But we see instance after instance of how of this callousness has now allowed certain sensitive all the way up to top secret information be put in the public sphere. That is extremely dangerous from someone seeking to be commander-in-chief. So I think there are vastly different circumstances that existed in those two circumstances. The last thing I'll say, Kate, is from my understanding that the only reason that we know about this is that the FBI actually spoke to Colin Powell. I don't believe that that's actually even occurred with Secretary Clinton. So if she wants to talk about a standard, then she should sit down with the FBI, as I believe Powell did, and then we'll have a conversation about what's fair.
Sean Spicer of the Republican National Committee. Thank you, Sean.